So I'm Christina Hartzell. I'm the communications coordinator at AdkAction, and we're joined tonight, as usual, by our Compost for Good team. We have John and Katie Culpepper of Compost for Good with us tonight as our compost experts, and we have another compost expert with us tonight. We have Astrid from Lake Placid, and she is our student composting expert, and she's going to be sharing with us a little bit about what their team has been doing at Lake Placid with community composting. While we're talking about community composting tonight, of course, all of your composting questions are welcome as we move into the questions tonight. So I'm sure we have a lot of ground to cover. So I'm going to turn things over to John and Katie and Astrid.
Well, I'm John Culpepper. This is Katie, and we are so delighted that you've joined us tonight.
Yeah, we're going to start out with, I want to get the screen sharing. We're going to start out with just a little bit of a presentation. Feel free to let us know if the audio is not working well. We have just a little presentation to set the stage, and then Astrid will have a little presentation. And then most of this next hour, we hope will just be questions and answers and discussions, and you all sharing your thoughts.
Trader Joe's, I think.
Okay, and a reminder to have yourself on mute if you are not already. So the title for this, our third Compost Cafe, was Community Scale Composting. As we said in the invitation, all questions are welcome, and we may or may not stick strictly to community scale composting during this discussion, but we are excited about community scale composting. John and I both have had many, many years of experience composting on a community scale, mostly at North Country School and Camp Treetops, where that community picture is taken right there. And from that work, we saw the excitement and the need and the inspiration to kind of promote the idea of community scale composting beyond just our little bubble. And so in that effort, we started Compost Cafe. I'm sorry, not Compost Cafe, Compost for Good. And that is a project with AdkAction. This is one of our little sayings here. We believe that community composting is an important part of building a more resilient world. By keeping food waste local, we keep money and nutrients local, which allows us to directly support our land and our neighbors. We really believe that, and we are really excited about the power that can come when people get together to do something as important as composting. We just wanted to share a few, we're not going to get too deep into these, but we wanted to share a few really good resources with you all. There are a lot out there, but there are a few here that we'll make sure that all participants have access to the links. And most of these also show up on our webpage on the AdkAction website. Cornell has a lot of really good composting resources, but they specifically have one about composting in schools, Clean River as well. There's a teacher's guide, and then James McSweeney's book, Community Scale Composting Systems, is kind of the Bible for composting geeks. It gets very in-depth about composting, but also just gives some really great examples of communities tackling composting out in the world. And just a few examples of, I stuck to New York because that's our home, and thought that most people were probably from New York or close by. There are, of course, examples all over the country, all over the world, but for this example, I stuck to New York. Just a few innovative projects, initiatives, organizations, businesses who are taking community scale composting and doing really fun things with it. Our most local there is Blue Line Compost. If you were on last time's Compost Cafe, Bill Domenico was joining us, and he is one of the founders of Blue Line Compost. But we have from New York and Rochester, Rye, Mamaroneck. All of these programs look totally different. All are composting differently, are picking up differently, are involving different people, but kind of go to show that there's lots of different ways to do it. And then lastly, as Compost for Good, we have one compost system that we're really excited about that John designed a few years ago and is what is being used at North Country School and Camp Treetops, and also actually what is being used at Lake Placid, which Astrid will share a little bit about how she's interacting with that. But this is a community scale composting system that we think has some potential. As you just saw, there are lots of different ways of doing it and lots of really exciting, innovative ways of doing it. So this is not by any means the end all be all of community scale composting, but one in particular that we can speak a lot about, and one that we're pretty excited about. So I will just share this video. So that's that. That gives you a sense of what kind of that closed loop system and a community scale composter in action looks like. And now I'd love for Astrid to take it over and talk about how her and her peers are using a composter just like that.
All right, let me just share my screen here. Oops, sorry, I pressed the wrong button. I had to press this one. All right. Hi, everyone. So I'm Astrid, and I am a junior at the Lake Placid High School. And I'm just going to talk a little bit about my environmental club's compost project and how we use compost on a community scale. So first, my environmental club has created a student-run nonprofit compost business, and we compost the food waste from our school, businesses, and households in our community. We use an industrial composter that can take up to 200 pounds of food waste a day, and we actually got this composter through a grant from NYSERDA, and it was put together by the Adirondack North Country Association in collaboration with John Culpepper, actually using his design. So this is the composter that we've been talking about. So Placid Earth is the name of the nonprofit organization that my environmental club has created, and students do all of the composting at Placid Earth. And the way we manage to run the business is food waste is dropped off in the mornings on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays, and then is composted by students immediately after school. It can take anywhere from 45 minutes to an hour and a half, depending on the amount of food waste we get that day. And students wash the buckets immediately after composting, which takes up time, and personally, I believe is grosser than composting. And then, so our specific compost process is first we have to weigh the buckets, and then we mix our food waste with wood pellets in a 1-to-4 recipe. So for every 4 pounds of food waste, we use 1 pound of wood pellets. We then shovel the waste into the composter and give it a spin. 30 days later, a nutrient.
I'm on a Zoom again.
Everyone, just make sure that you are muted until you're asking a question. Please and thank you. Again, so 30 days later, nutrient-rich compost is produced, but you have to let the initial product sit before it can be used as a fertilizer. And again, immediately after composting, we wash our buckets and the process starts all over again. It's a pretty simple process, so it's easy for students to run. Composting during COVID hasn't really changed. Our system has always been low contact. Our clients just drop off their food waste in the shed next to our composter, and a couple hours later, we come and pick up the food waste and then compost it. The only thing that has changed has been the amount of food waste produced by the Lake Placid High School itself, because students are no longer eating in the cafeteria due to COVID regulations, so we can't get all of the students' food waste. It is only food waste from the kitchen itself. And why we compost. So the Lake Placid Environmental Club started Placid Earth to reduce the large amounts of food waste sent to our local landfill every year. Because, when foods break down in landfills, it releases a harmful greenhouse gas, methane, into the atmosphere. And we strive to reduce our carbon footprint, and by creating this composting business, we can help people who also want to reduce their carbon footprints. And it's all been made possible by this awesome community scale composter. That's it. It's a pretty simple process. Thank you.
Thank you, Astrid.
Thanks, Astrid.
And we're going to open it up to any questions or thoughts that you may have. And I do want to make sure we say that we recognize that there is a lot of expertise probably on this call as well. So if you have experience in communities, composting, success stories, or otherwise that you would like to share, please feel free to do that as well. This can be a very informal conversation. So feel free to turn your video on if you would like, to unmute yourself if you'd like to ask a question, or continue to write in the chat if that is what works best for you. I see a couple coming in that I will read out loud before we go any further. Why emphasis on washing buckets? Astrid, what do you?
I think that's I just included that as a personal anecdote. I personally do not enjoy washing the buckets, and it is a pretty big part of composting. And I feel like a lot of people kind of overlook that, is you have to have clean buckets. So I don't know.
And I think, it's a really good point. The composter that we developed can accommodate up to 50,000 pounds of food waste in a year. I'm not sure how much you're processing, Astrid, but at any one time in that 20-foot long, 4-foot diameter drum, there's about 3,000 pounds of composting food waste. And cleanliness is really important. Cleanliness around the composter, the buckets, the shovels, the mixing devices. It can quickly turn into a PR problem or issue if you don't really focus on cleanliness.
Right. Yeah. One of the reasons that people don't want to get into composting, or administrators don't want to say yes to composting, is because there is this idea that it is disgusting and smelly, and there are flies and rodents, and all of that is possible if it's not managed well. So keeping clean buckets is important, Astrid.
Very important.
And Astrid, another question that came in right after is, let's talk about volunteers, school breaks, et cetera. How do you deal with school breaks and volunteers who want to help, et etc.?
So luckily we have a really awesome team. It's small. There are about 4 of us who compost regularly on the Monday, Wednesday, Friday shift. So for school breaks, we all just understand that Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, one of us we all coordinate and say, oh, I will take Monday and I will take Wednesday. And we all go at like 2-ish, because that's when school gets out, to compost, because we understand it's a commitment. So that is what we do. And it's actually really difficult to get volunteers, because there is this whole thing around composting, is that it's smelly and there's flies, like you said. So we've basically been working with the same 4 people for the year and a half we've been doing it. But luckily it's an awesome group, so we can all, we manage really well.
And for anyone who is new to the world of composting, there's lots of different ways to compost. This system that we developed is what's known as an in-vessel composter. And in this drum, this container, we compost anything and everything that comes out of the kitchens: meat scraps, dairy, paper products to some extent. Anything that is pre and post consumer food waste goes in there. And unlike many backyard composters, we can handle meat scraps and dairies. Whereas if you just pile that stuff up in a pile and really don't have the size pile, the thermal mass, then it can get pretty smelly. But this is in-vessel systems allow for a really small area. The one that Astrid showed you is in a 40-foot shipping container. We have 3 of those in New York State, and a couple of other units in little small buildings. And I think at this point in time, for anyone who just wants to ask a question without writing it out, let's take just a moment, unmute yourself and introduce yourself. And if anyone is interested, ask away. This is really meant to be informal, and we want to make sure that you get your questions answered.
Hey, I have a question. First of all, thanks, Astrid. That was really cool presentation, and that's a really awesome project, especially since you're all high schoolers, so respect. I'm a grad student at ESF studying compost. I've met many of you already. My advisor, Doug Daly, is in the house as well. I wanted to ask about like the nonprofit aspect of your project, and I guess sort of like what factors went into deciding to go with a nonprofit, and how did you make that happen? You know, like what did you have to do? What obstacles were there, etc.?
So becoming a nonprofit was it was a process. We decided to become a nonprofit because, we wanted to be a business that could help other people compost in the community. And we figured it would probably be easier to become a nonprofit, and also you don't have to pay taxes and stuff. So those were some of the decisions that went into being, oh, let's just be a nonprofit. And there were a lot of meetings that we had to go to. I sat down with some of the people at AdkAction with my advisor, and they were hour-long meetings just discussing how it would work, because it's AdkAction works as a sponsor for us. So it was just a lot of talking and figuring out how it would work. It took months to figure out.
How long ago did you get your nonprofit status?
I think, oh man, I feel so bad for not knowing the exact date. I think it was late last school year, so
Okay.
earlier in 2020, I think.
Cool. Almost a year then.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Another one right for you is who provides the buckets to those bringing the food scraps?
So that is us.
Astrid, somehow we lost your audio. I think it's a connectivity, maybe a connectivity issue.
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead. We hear you now.
Okay. Sorry. Okay. Where was I?
Buckets.
You provide the
Yeah. We have to write a lot of grants. So actually, last year we wrote a grant for the Wild Center for like, I think it was like $2,500, and that covered the cost of a bunch of buckets. So we just leave the buckets in the shed, and when our clients drop off the dirty buckets, they pick up a new bucket, and it just works like that.
Here's an
Yeah, go ahead.
easy one. Can the process be successful with carbon other than wood pellets? Do you want to just do a quick other carbon?
Yes. In-vessel composters are they're rotating drums, so you have to be a little bit careful with some carbon sources. We have experience with wood chips, wood shavings, like you would find in an animal stall, and wood pellets, like you burn in a pellet stove or a pellet boiler. We have or at least North Country School Camp Treetops for the last, I don't know, year or maybe 2 years has used pellets because it's just super convenient. It is the most expensive type of carbon you could use. But one of the reasons why North Country School Camp Treetops uses it is because we, and by the way, I'm until I retire, I'm Director of Facilities and Sustainability at North Country School Camp Treetops, and we buy pellets by the 20-ton load because we have several large pellet boilers, heating plants on campus. But you can use all kinds of different carbon, from shells to coconut husks. I would be careful with shredded paper. That's the one thing that we've tried that tends to, in the rotating process, it tends to roll up into balls and isn't as successful as we would like, but just about any kind of carbon works.
Thank you. And then this is for Astrid as well. Where's the compost that you produce being used, which also ties into what kind of community advocacy have you tried and found to be effective? Does the community get to see the process in action? Do they get to see the results reaped from the compost in community gardens, etc.? So how are you using your compost, and how are you involving the community, if at all, other than in the bucket swap?
So the compost isn't really being used at the moment. Our product just kind of sits behind our composter. We're actually working on a grant right now to make some improvements to get a nice little area to store all of our compost, because it has to sit for a little while. Our goal is to be able to sell the compost as a product to the community. But as of right now, it's pretty much we just take people's food waste. People don't get to see our process in action. I don't think people would really want to see the process. A lot of people think it smells very bad. To address that part of the question, I can see it here on my screen. And eventually, we will have our compost in community gardens, just not yet.
So I'd like to speak to that just for a moment. The environmental benefits of upcycling all organics, food scraps, leaves, you name it. There's great environmental benefit, but also the economic benefit is pretty amazing. Compost now is selling for around this area where we live in Lake Placid up to $9 a cubic foot. That's a little bag that's about this. It's pretty remarkable what the market for compost is. So for anyone who is interested in community scale composting or getting a community scale initiative started, the environmental benefits, of course, are gigantic, but these can be self-sustaining enterprises and can actually yield quite a bit of revenue.
On the money note, this question came in earlier. Could you repeat which grant you use to have your industrial composter and describe exactly what it does? Does it just spin during 30 days, and can you share the price?
It was it was the NYSERDA grant, NYSERDA. And the composter itself, it doesn't spin the entire time during the 30 days. You know, we put the stuff in and there's this green button next to it that we have to press and hold while it does its rotations. And then I just said that every 30 days because when you put stuff in, like the same stuff you put in 30 days later, it's that stuff that's coming out. But there's always stuff coming out because there's always stuff going in.
So I'll address the NYSERDA grant. We've the Lake Placid composter was part of a NYSERDA grant that North Country School Camp Treetops got. NYSERDA is the New York State Energy Research and Development Authority, and this was part of a much larger grant in the North Country. I forget how many millions of dollars were bundled, but at any rate, it was a fairly large grant. We ended up getting a total of 4. We got a grant to build the initial composter that's now been in operation for almost 5 years at the North Country School Camp Treetops campus. And then we got another grant from the same organization, NYSERDA, and through a competitive process, different organizations applied to receive one. So Lake Placid actually put in an application with us, and they got the composter donated to their site, which is actually at the Shipman Youth Center, operated by Lake Placid High School students, but on the Shipman Youth Center grounds. Would anyone else like to unmute and ask a question in person, so to speak?
Douglas, yeah.
Somehow we can't hear you.
I have a question.
How about now?
Oh, there you go.
There you go.
Okay, sorry, I was muted in other ways. Astrid, you said that people don't like to get involved because it smells, but I'm wondering, and maybe John's got some insights if he's visited your facility, does it smell like raw feedstocks, or does it smell worse than that?
Personally, I don't think it smells that bad. I never have. Part of the reason why I got into it is because I was one of the people who could handle the smell.
Strong stomach, yeah.
But also, I have found that like it'll change, and it's not necessarily the compost itself that smells, but it's the food waste that people don't want to deal with, because the food waste sometimes smells really, really bad. So that's what kind of steers people away from it.
Okay.
So
And yeah, John, I have a technical question for you.
Sure.
So I read some of your documents, and I'm wondering how frequently, because if the students are charging the trommel every couple of days, but only rotating it when they charge it, is it sitting static then between those chargings, or does it rotate every few hours if somebody's there to push the little green button?
So I can't speak to Astrid's situation, but it was designed to be rotated every day. We have found that we can go up to 2 or 3 days without rotation, but the bacteria and the bacteria-like organisms that are inside really do need to be oxygenated. And when you rotate, it fluffs the material. That's when the oxygen gets into the matrix. So but on the smell issue, there's a couple of things that make any composting situation with food waste, with food scraps, smell. Either there's too much liquid, there's not enough oxygen, or not enough carbon. And if you make small adjustments, you can find even in conditions like we've got now, where it's really cold on our campus, you really should not have a whole lot of strong smell coming out of there. Like Astrid said, sometimes if the food waste coming down has been sitting around for a couple of days, it'll smell. But you cover it up with carbon inside the drum, and it really shouldn't smell. If there's a liquid emanating out of the drum, it's too wet. You need to add more carbon. But these things can be operated in a way where most people don't really notice the smell. I can't tell you how many dozens and dozens of people I have toured through the North Country School Camp Treetops unit, and most people say, "This is amazing. This doesn't smell at all." So,
have you had any issue with like rats or vermin or raccoons or that sort of thing?
no, not in an in-vessel unit. We have on occasion had mice be very interested in getting into the material that exits the drum, that's discharged from the drum. But if operated properly, even in New York City, even in Brooklyn, where they do a lot of composting, if you're really careful about how you treat the food waste and how it's all about making those little fellows inside the drum happy, the bacteria and the microbes happy. You keep them happy, the temperature is up, and flies aren't interested, dogs aren't interested, bears aren't interested, and mice and rats aren't. Sometimes we get mice in the discharge stuff just because it's a cozy home, but not in the drum itself.
And while we're talking about that, ventilation question just came up. Speaking of.
Yes, in a confined space like a 40-foot shipping container, ventilation is a must. So the one that Astrid is familiar with has a vent fan. Astrid, is that running all the time? Do you know?
I think it is. I'm pretty sure.
Venting is really important in an enclosed space. In a building, it's important. It helps with the smell, but also it helps exhaust the water vapor. And in fact, we have one operating on our campus, and for the first 2 years, we did not vent, and we rotted out part of the roof as a result. These things generate an enormous amount of water vapor, and you don't always see it, but it's present in the building. So venting is a must. And I think someone else had started to ask a question, and we cut them off. So if you have a question,
It was answered with the gentleman. I'm Bernadette, Tom's wife.
Bernadette,
Tom's
great.
over here.
Okay.
Great.
From Grow Amsterdam. But yeah, the question was
Okay.
answered. I guess one of the questions that I do have, like, what's the cost of the pellets? Because, you know, we're a non-for-profit, and unless you get a grant, where does the money come from?
For the pellets specifically, or for the unit itself?
No, for the pellets. How much are the pellets for like a year? What's the total that you spend?
Yeah, that's a great question. Pellets are now running here about $220 a ton, I think. And in a year, let me do some quick math.
While he's doing math about pellets, I will just share that, as John said before, pellets are a great, compact, clean material to use as your carbon source, but they are expensive, and there are a lot of other carbon sources, wood chips being the main one, that can often come for free from municipalities or tree service companies or electric companies. So pellets are not if you're on a tight budget, pellets may not be the venue you want to go
Right.
down, but there are other carbon sources.
Well, I think I was under the impression that you could only use pellets with this system, but that's not the.
No. We've you can use wood chips, wet wood chips, dry wood chips.
How about leaves?
Leaves are potentially problematic because leaves, like paper, will mat up. If the leaves are dry and if they're sort of crumbled, it would be worth a try. But if I had a large amount of leaves, I wouldn't use it in compost. I'd make leaf mold. That's really awesome stuff. So to answer your initial question, about 1,000, about 4 tons is used at North Country School. So it's did I do my math right? A little over 1,000 pounds, if I did my arithmetic correctly.
Okay, for the
A little
year.
over $1,000 if I did my
For the year.
for a year. But that's
Okay.
that's 30. That's to process about 35,000 pounds of food waste.
Okay. So I have another question.
Sure.
So if you put 200 pounds of food scraps, so what's your recipe that you need of carbon to, create the perfect marriage where everyone's happy?
Yeah, that's a really great question. And it is a bit of an art form, and it depends on your feedstock, how wet that is, and it depends on your carbon source. So for example, in our system, almost no matter what we put in, in the North Country School Camp Treetop system, almost no matter what goes in, it evens out so that we put in 0.275 pounds of pellets for every pound of food waste.
So who's counting?
So if you have
So you have a little bit more, or almost double.
about 1 to 4, it works out.
Okay.
Which is what Astrid is using as well.
Yeah, and
Okay.
so, but that's a mass to mass recipe. If you're doing a volumetric, so in when we composted with wood chips, when we did static composting, we would put about four times the amount of wood chips so we reversed it, four parts volumetrically, 4 parts wood chips to 1 part food waste. So I wouldn't get too, unless you're really interested in the details, and if you are, highly recommend James McSweeney's book, where he goes into great detail about how to develop a recipe. But I can tell you right now, if you have smells coming out, your smells are coming out because your temperatures are low. If your temperatures are low, your mix is off. If it smells, more than likely, in almost every case, you need to add more carbon. And
I hear you.
Well,
thank you. Tom has another question too. Can you regulate how long the material is in the drum if you wanted to extend the process?
The way these operate, generally speaking, is that that you want to keep the drum half full all the time. So if a small amount is going in, a small amount is going out, and so the retention time is much longer. So, for example, if you're putting in 50 pounds a day, then you're rotating the drum in such a way that about, it's not 50 pounds that comes out because you're losing CO2 and water vapor, but some amount is coming out such that the drum stays half full. If you put in, so the retention time is long, let's call it 2 months long. If you're putting in 200 pounds a day, 4 times that amount, 4 times 50, then, did I do that right? Yeah. Then your retention time, the amount of time that material stays in the drum, is less. It is not composted as much when it comes out, but so instead of instead of playing that game in terms of, how long do we want to keep it in, we let the amount that goes in determine how much, how fast the retention time is. So there are times on our campus where we have downtimes where there's not much going in at all because it's spring break or what have you. And there are other times, summer camp, where we have our population doubles and we have a whole lot more going in, but we always keep the drum half full. So we rotate it enough so that the drum always stays half full. Does that help?
Does that help? You said yes. Thank you.
And maybe talk about screening, since you talked about what comes out. A question just came up. How much of your wood chips input do you recover? Do you screen the product at all?
Yeah, that's a great question. So wood chips do require either to be screened when it comes out, or you simply let the material continue to further mature in a secondary pile. Even if it sits for several months, you may still have wood chips that are too big for your purposes. So nobody goes to the garden center and buys compost with big chunky things in it. It's always screened out. But if you're using it on site, you don't have to screen it at all. But if you're using the compost for sale, then generally speaking, no matter what your carbon source is, you're going to have to screen it because there will be bones that don't get fully decomposed. There'll be chunky bits of whatever, spoons and forks and things like that end up in the pile. So so it depends.
And any of that organic material that is screened out can just go right back into the composter.
And should go right back in.
The spoons, not so much, but the rest of it. Yeah. There was a question from Christian. Thank you. For John, what are your thoughts on the food cycler design developed by Food Cycle Science and recently bought by Vitamix as a residential consumer-oriented food waste dehydrator and grinder? It is marketed as a way to both reduce odors and food waste volume. Although the original developers said the resulting product was useful as a soil additive, what kind of impact do you think this product would have in community composting?
Yeah, I'm familiar with the product, and it is and it doesn't smell because it uses, if I'm correct, I think I am. It uses heat to dehydrate the food waste. So so it's energy intensive, which is a factor if you're trying to lower your carbon footprint or your footprint in general. They are, but if you're going to be composting inside of a commercial kitchen or inside your home, you're going to have to go with something like this or some sort of vermicomposting system that can't handle as much anywhere close to the amount of food waste that an in-vessel unit would handle. So I don't have any personal experience with those units, but I'm familiar with them. I'm aware of them.
Thank you. And then I don't know that you've said this twice. We've had just how much is this unit itself? How much does it cost? And I want you to answer that, but I also want to, just for everyone, this unit is exciting and we can talk all day, all night about it. We have 15 minutes left. If there are other questions about this unit in particular, Astrid's work with this unit in particular, or just community scale composting, why you'd want to do it, how one might do it, etc. Feel free to ask anything. We don't have to focus just on this composter design, though we certainly can if that's of interest. But cost.
And a large part of what we are saying can be found on the AdkAction website. We are one of their projects. And if you click on our web page.
And Christina just put it in the chat because
thanks,
she's
Christina.
so good.
Then it'll take you right to an emerging web page. There's going to be a lot more material on it, but on that web page, you'll find an operating manual that we're in the process of re-editing right at the moment. You'll find a design guide. You'll find lots of resources. So the initial composter that we developed We developed it for, it can be built or was built for about $15,000 in material cost. We know that we can get the cost down. We've already seen others who are experimenting with our design, getting that cost down. And so I think this size unit, we could probably get well under $10,000 in material cost. And if you're a really handy person and don't count your labor, then that's your cost. If you hire it out and somebody else builds it, then it depends on the labor market where you are. This unit was really built, very passionate about this. We want this out into the world and we want people to experiment with it. We intentionally did not patent it because we want people to make it better, less expensive to build. So $15,000, and then the price drops as more innovation is poured into the design.
Great, thank you. Christian, thank you for this question. Astrid, this one's for you. How are you setting up, this is a great question. How are you setting up the nonprofit's legacy regarding student volunteers who are graduating away from the program? How are you recruiting and training new people? If I understand it, all of you four are juniors, right? So you have a little bit of time to figure it out.
Yeah, we're all juniors, and that's a great question. We ask ourselves that all the time. There are a few freshmen who we got to help us with bucket washing last year when they were in 8th grade. So we're hoping that next year, when things are a little bit more normal and we can meet in person, because right now all of our environmental clubs meetings are over Zoom and it's really hard to get people there. So we're hoping next year we can start training those freshmen who are going to be sophomores next year so they can take over, because we really do not want it to become obsolete.
Thank you, Astrid. Any other, another question. Talk about the means, methods to get community members to participate. Should we mandate? Should we charge? Should we rely on only environmental activism? This can be for anyone. Do you have thoughts about that?
Yeah, I do. There are a lot of different iterations of community scale composting out in the world, and they work in, there's a lot of different ways to work them. So it depends on your community members. Oftentimes, they are led by passionate individuals who get these things started. More and more, at least in the state of New York, the impetus will come from municipal officials who are interested in joining the governor's plan to reduce our environmental impact and join the green, what's the clean energy? Climate smart community. So it depends. There's a lot of different ways to organize composting or organics recycling initiatives. Very often they start at the municipal level at the transfer station or at the landfill. For those of you who are not aware, New York State passed a law that's coming that will begin January 1st, where large-scale producers of food scraps will no longer be able to landfill. That's going to generate a lot of innovation in the state, and that's going to spark an awful lot of conversations. The same sort of conversations that were sparked 5 years ago in Vermont. In Vermont, you, excuse me, cross over to Vermont and you've got composting initiatives all over the state. It is now illegal as a resident to landfill. No one can landfill, probably there are some exceptions, but they've really done a really good job, and that sparked a lot of different communities to find different ways to develop composting programs, at least for food scraps.
And I would add to that, and and I think so much of it comes down to education. I think there are still a lot of people who don't see what the problem is with landfilling food waste. And so there's not going to be a whole lot of fire behind it if it's kind of like, well, I don't know, it's what we do, it's what most communities do, what's the problem? So I think education, having these kinds of units in schools like Astrid's, where she is a junior and she is leading this charge and teaching 8th graders, and that's a pretty amazing thing that's happening. It's not happening in a lot of schools. So to the extent that we can get the word out about why we should care about composting in general, and I would say the community piece to it is really important because we're all involved, we're all eating. We had I thought a really interesting conversation today with a farmer in the Adirondacks who was really excited about composting. He has a great need for more composting on his fields because he is growing a lot of food for the Adirondacks and beyond. And he's really excited about composting, but doesn't necessarily have the capacity to do it himself. And so that, to me, after that conversation with him, it just reiterated for me the broken, where the cycle breaks down, and that is that, you know, consumers are getting this delicious food grown by farmers, and then farmers are buying fertilizer and inputs, spending a lot of money to bring fertility back into fields to grow food for consumers. And so there's this piece of the puzzle that's missing, and I think to recognize that, and to recognize that all of us are those consumers who have the option or the choice to compost food waste or to landfill it, to bring those resources, keep them in the community, to bring them to a facility, to innovate and spark a project or get behind someone who is starting a project. I think just recognizing that we're all, this is a problem or I don't know, potential for all of us, and we are all playing a role in making it so that a farmer who is growing our food is spending a lot of money to bring in compost from Vermont and fertilizer from wherever, and meanwhile we have kind of all the materials to make those inputs for the soils, and we're sending them away. So that's a little bit of a rant, but I do think it's really important to the solution, I think, lies in community has to recognize that it is a problem, and that they have some power to innovate and demand from leaders that there are solutions, and that there's funding. If New York State wants more composting, then there has to be some funding that backs that up, so that innovators, entrepreneurs have something to get themselves started to do more composting to offset landfilling.
So as Katie said initially, there's probably a lot of expertise in the room. And if anyone would like to share some cool stories about your communities and what you're doing in your communities, I would love to hear it. So if you have anything to say, unmute yourself and just let us hear it.
Yeah, I'm going to volunteer my graduate student, Grace Anderson, to tell us about her project.
All right, Grace.
Go, Grace.
Cool. Okay. So we are actually looking into shredded cardboard composting, which at a couple of these webinars has been brought up. So yeah, carbon source is a huge thing. And I think it's relevant to also discuss the carbon in our MSW that we throw out. Obviously food waste is super important and easier to compost, but we have high tech out there as well as low tech that's been around for a while from maybe like the paper recycling industry, et cetera, that we could use. So I'm looking into potential ways to improve like shredded cardboard composting specifically, but it's also, I'm the first in a long line of grad students in the future on this project at ESF's new Sustainable Materials Management Center. So we're going to start looking into more problem papers too, and more non-recyclable papers, because that's another huge source in the landfill. But I think at the community scale, we're definitely learning a lot about scaling your compost, and there's definitely a lot of market issues. I think we've been doing as part of the research center's initiatives. A different grad student has been taking the lead on conducting surveys across New York State for composters and paper recyclers, MRFs, if you will. So we're trying to identify issues with composting paper and non-recyclable papers and where they're going and how to divert those. So if we can identify the compostability of papers as well as how to effectively transport them, et cetera, we can hopefully localize that as well. But I think, yeah, there's just a lot of issues that don't really have anything to do with science or engineering at the end of the day that we've even touched upon here, which is like just education when it comes down to it. Even in recycling, which has been around and been mainstream for a lot longer than composting, it's still a lot of miseducation out there.
Grace, let me jump in. Yeah, let me jump in because people want to hear horror stories as well. So,
Yeah.
so just so everybody knows, we're doing a multi-step process here. So we're not intending to compost corrugated cardboard, which should be recycled. All right, but there's a lot of other types of paper that either aren't captured by current recycling programs or have no market value as a recovered product. So that's what we're looking at, is the stuff that's still ending up in the waste stream and ending up in either waste energy or landfill facilities. But in terms of horror stories, and the reason I asked you, Astrid, about the odor was we worked with Wegmans to as our source of food waste, and we were bringing in food waste by the 90-gallon tote full in order to execute this project, which Grace and another grad student and I basically ended up pulverizing the food waste using a backyard chipper shredder, meaning that we would feed it in and we'd basically get a 5-gallon bucket of slurry out of this thing that then we blended with the shredded paper, and we applied a treatment to see if we could enhance the biodegradation. So that we're trying to bring a little bit additional science to looking at the degradation rates of some of these products that are harder to break down, that take longer. So the cellulose and lignocellulose in particular. So that's why, John, you recover and everybody on the call, that's why you're recovering the wood chips, because they take forever to break down compared to the food waste. So on day one, immediately, so we were using 30-gallon barrels. We were mixing everything, putting them into 30-gallon barrels with aeration. And on day one, which was a Monday, the chancellor of SUNY decided to stop in to ESF, and we were using an indoor controlled environment chamber. And that particular day, the odor decided it was going to spread itself through our one hallway. And so the solution was, by somebody, not me, was to open up all the doors in the building so that it spread through 4 stories of our academic building. A couple of hours before the chancellor showed up. So we had the odor issue, and Grace, I just have to bring it up because this is what we do as part of research. Is we also ash these samples down so we can find out what's in it, which means we incinerate them basically at 550 degrees Celsius. And Grace triggered the smoke detectors in the building on another day. So we've had the odor, we've had the smoke. The odor problem abated quickly within a few hours. It was not an issue after day one, and we've just completed 90 days of composting without any odor issues. We had a fruit fly explosion for about 3 days, just in your face, massive amounts of fruit flies, and then they went away and never came back. So no explanation there for biology. Grace took care of the smoke detector system. Exposed the weaknesses in the smoke detector system in the building. And most recently, we had a flood in our space, which wasn't too horrible. It was just, a smearing of water that ran down the hallway, because we had a controlled environment chamber, which had humidity control in it, and the line leading to the humidifier hadn't been used in 20 years, and so that decided to rupture one weekend. And so we've taken care of earth, wind, fire, smoke, fruit flies, and everything else. But we definitely have. I've learned things that I thought I already knew from the experience. I agree with what you said, John. It's an art form to try to find the right mix ratios. One of the things, though, is that food waste in and of itself has a pretty good carbon to nitrogen ratio. And one of the things for people on the call is that the wood chips or whatever it is provides structure for aeration. You want to provide that porosity so that air can flow. And one of the things that Grace found, and I was very concerned about airflow, I was concerned about anaerobic conditions early on. And we were blowing air through these things, and we were cooling the piles too much. And so we couldn't get them up to temperature. And Grace, I think we backed down to turning the blower on for like 5 minutes every 2 or 3 hours or something like that. And it was fine for the duration. So yeah, and it does generate a lot of water vapor. So John pointed that out. You got to have good ventilation in your full scale facility. We were only doing research scale, so we got away with it for a while. But if you're doing full scale, good ventilation. Also, something that doesn't get a lot of attention, those microbes, if you're in an enclosed space without ventilation, those microbes are consuming oxygen. And we like to consume oxygen also. So if you have a closed space without ventilation and you go in there, atmospheric oxygen concentration is around 21%. We were measuring sometimes below 19% in the breathing space. And inside the pile, we were seeing well below 18%. But as long as you have at least 5%, it'll maintain aerobic conditions and keep on going. So that's another it's not monitored by commercial operations. They only look at temperature, but we wanted to make sure we were providing sufficient oxygen throughout. So we're 2 minutes over because I talked for an extra 2 minutes, but.
Great stories. For everyone on the call, if you have questions that didn't get answered, please go to our website. You can contact me or Katie and we can continue the conversation. Doug, thanks very much for all of that. Grace, well done. Astrid, thanks for your presentation. And let's keep on composting. It's good stuff.
Yes, thank you.
One question.
Sorry. Yep, go ahead.
Are you having a tour anytime soon?
We do lots of tours, but during COVID, with COVID protocols, we have to be sort of careful. So if you'd like to come see us, you can contact me directly and I'll make it happen.
You heard that? Thank you.
You're welcome.
Great. Maybe someday we'll have to do an in-depth video tour too.
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Great. Well, that really flew by. Thank you all so much for joining. Thank you, John and Katie and Astrid. And thank you, Grace and Doug, also for the science behind some of this stuff. This is like really a wonderful Compost Cafe. And I'm really sorry to say that it is, at least for now, our last Compost Cafe. But
Doug made the case, I think, that we should have another one called The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly.
the good, the bad, and the ugly of composting would be
where we're just troubleshooting all
the bring us your ugly compost. Okay, well, thank you all so much for joining. And once again, if you need any of the information here tonight, it's on adkAction.org/compost. We'll direct you to the Compost for Good team. And we will also be posting a recording of this along with the recordings of our other Compost Cafe series. So everyone have a great evening and thanks for joining.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Good night, everyone.
Thank you.
Astrid.
Thank you.